Hi, I'm Agnes and welcome to my eclectic channel. I make videos for fun. Today I want to talk about resizing knitting patterns. Resizing knitting patterns is actually not hard. It requires a bit of math, but very little. The only math skill you need is working with proportions. Learning how to resize knitting patterns is useful not only for the obvious reason that you want to be able to make garments that fit you. You can even, if you learn this simple skill, you can fairly easily design your own or modify any pattern to fit your body and your taste. Another reason it's handy to learn how to do that is if you want to use vintage knitting patterns. Often those come without a sketch and sometimes without an indication of what the sizes are. The normal approach to using knitting patterns is to make swatches and try and match the gauge given. And once you can match the gauge that's given, then you just follow the steps completely as given. Here we're going to learn how to break away from that. I am going to use a vintage pattern as my example, and it's going to be a good example because it's the hardest thing you can encounter. It's a pattern from the 1950s and we have no indication of size. Well, there's a size listed, but we don't know what it corresponds to. And as is very usual with those older patterns, there is no sketch. And throughout this video, I am going to be using centimeters. It is the units that I grew up with. If you tell me 20 centimeters, I have a very clear picture of how much that is. If you tell me 20 inches, I don't know. So it's safer for me to work in centimeters. And another thing about centimeters is that it's smaller units. If you forgot, it is roughly 2.5 centimeters to an inch. And so that means that it is entirely possible to, when you're sewing or when you're knitting, entirely possible to work down to the nearest centimeters. Sometimes you got to do the half centimeter, but that's all you'll do. You're not going to get down to a quarter or 3/8 or the kind of stuff you have to work with inches. End of rant. Back to our example. For this one, I am lacking a sketch of the finished pieces, and even more fun, I am lacking sizing information. I did download the front matter for this leaflet, and it has no sizing. So I don't know what a size 34 is. Waistline, bust, I don't know. And so that's all we've got to work with. So what we do have that will help us get started, we have a gauge, and we shall completely ignore this. Since I don't know how big this is, there's no point in following the gauge. But it's good to know they're working off of this gauge. And after that, I have the instructions. So I know how many stitches we're putting on for when we start the jacket, and I know how many we're decreasing over how many rows. So I do have that information. That's it. From the gauge and from the instructions, we are going to make a sketch of what the piece looks like, and we're going to put measurements on it. So here's an outline of the process. From the instructions, we are going to make a sketch. On that sketch, we're going to put down the stitch counts and row counts. And then we're going to bring in our own measurements, and we're going to put our measurements on that sketch. And finally, we bring in our gauge. And from the gauge and our own measurements, we are going to have a sketch with the new stitch counts And then from there you can build a new set of instructions. I've reproduced the instructions and I translated all of the inches and wonky fractions of the inches into centimeters, and try to put that statement by statement, and we'll go through one by one. If you're a knitter, you know that sweaters are started from the bottom and worked bottom up. So the first statement has to do with the bottom. So we start there, and we are told to cast on 52 stitches. And knit 2 rows. That's going to be 2 rows of garter stitches so that it doesn't roll up. And then we switch to our stockinette stitch, and what do? We're decreasing 1 on each side every 4 rows 7 times. And helpfully they tell us that this is going to leave us with 38 stitches. So they did some math for us, but the math we need to do is to figure out how many rows is that every 4 7 times. So do 7 times 4, if I'm not mistaken, that's 28. So we're going to be decreasing over 28 rows until we are down to 38 stitches. And then by then we should be pretty close to it, but if we're not there yet, we should continue until we worked 15 centimeters. And then, so I'm exaggerating this work even part here. I don't think it'll be that long. But at any rate, we continue on our 38 stitches until we are 15 centimeters from the bottom row. And then we want to work in ribbing for 4 centimeters, 1 by 1 ribbing. So we're going to do this 1 by 1 ribbing. Apologies, my tablet doesn't write everywhere. For 4 centimeters. And then we are back to stockinette, and we're going to increase every 6 rows 8 times. So again, a bit of math, 6 times 8, 48. So we're going to increase over 48 rows until we get to 54 stitches. And then we work even until we are 38 centimeters from the start. So again, by then we should be almost there, but we keep going until we are 38 centimeters from the bottom. And look at the statement they make here, or required length to armhole. So here they hint as to, you got to make this work for yourself. So depending on the length of your torso, you're going to measure from where the jacket hits on the hips to where you want to begin the armhole. And then we get to the armhole, and here I am going to fudge. Armholes are a different beast, and they're a beast. So we'll treat that differently. So here we're just going to put the bottom line. We're going to decrease for the armhole. So we bind off, we decrease, etc. Somehow round it until we are down to 42 stitches. And then we work even until the armhole is 19 centimeter tall. So that is from where we started it. And then it's time to bind off for the shoulders. And again, we'll, when we do the exact math, we'll revisit that. But basically, you're sloping the shoulders. And the last piece of information is useful. Bind off remaining 18 stitches for back of neck. So we know that at the end, we have 18 stitches left. another sketch. Next time we're going to take some measurements. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like.